Hi, welcome to Rush Ranch. My name is Chet, and I'm here to talk to you about the Patwin and trade. The Patwin lived here in the area of Rush Ranch for many, many years, and evidence we have of that is that there's a grinding rock that has been identified as being about 2,000 years old. So we know they were here. Now, the Patwin, they lived in various areas in Solano County. One of the areas was right here at the marsh at Rush Ranch. And when they lived off the land. Now, what does that mean, living off the land? Well, living off the land means that if you wanted to eat, you had to either find it, catch it, or kill it. If you wanted to build something, you needed to find the materials to build that something with. Most of that was here at Rush Ranch. However, there were some things that they needed that they had to trade for, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. So let's talk about food. When they wanted to eat, they couldn't go to Safeway, couldn't go to Costco or Raley's, no McDonald's, no Taco Bell. They had to go out and hunt their food. What do you think they hunted? Well, I'm sure you're thinking about deer, rabbits, geese, ducks, and maybe you've heard of something called a tule elk. Well, a tule elk lived here, and they went somewhere between 600 and 800 pounds. And the males had a rack of antlers about this big. They were huge. And if you want to see what tule elk look like, there's a place near here called Grizzly Island. It's about 9 miles away. And there's a herd of tule elk there, and they're accessible at certain times of the year. So you can go and look at them. The other thing that they did was they found roots and berries, and they ate those. They also fished in the marsh. They fished for salmon, bass, sturgeon, carp, various things like that. And they also dug up these. These are called mussels. And a waterway near where they lived was called the Hill Slough. And the Hill Slough, the water in it was governed by the tides of the ocean. So a couple of times a day, the tide would go out and it would be shallow. And they would go into the shallow area and they would dig this mussel shell up. And the mussel shell was important for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was meat in it that they would eat. And very, very good and very nutritious. And secondly, they saved the shells. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. They also had things that they were available to build with. And one of the things was something called a tule. Now, tules grew in the marsh, and they grew 12, 15, 20 feet tall, and I've got a small one right here. This is a piece of tule. And so what are some of the things that they built with tules? What do you think? Well, I'm sure you thought of tule huts. Now, we built this tule hut. We're not really great builders. They were a lot better than we were. It took us a couple of weeks to build this. They would build this hut in a couple of hours. And it would keep them out of the rain, keep them dry. So, what other things? Boats. Tule boat. We made this boat as well. It floated for a while, but theirs were a lot better. And they used the boats to fish, to hunt with, things like that. What else? Well, an example, this is a basket that we made. You've seen other baskets that were a heck of a lot better. We were kind of learning to make a basket, and this one really wouldn't hold water, but this is the type of thing that they would take out, and if they wanted to get some duck eggs or something like that, they'd put it in the basket. They could whip one of these out in probably 15 or 20 minutes. Rope, some of that. They also had toys for the children, clothing, duck decoys to lure the duck and the geese in so they could hunt them. So tules were very, very important. Now, as I said, they had many things that they could live off the land here, but some things they didn't have. And those things, what they needed to do was trade for. So, what's trade? Real simple. If you have something I want or need, and I have something you want or need, and we exchange it, that's called trade. And that's what the Patwin had to do. And I'll give you a couple of examples of things they traded for. One of the prime examples was this right here. Now, what is this rock? Time's up. It's obsidian. And where does it come from? Time's up. It comes from a volcano, an extinct volcano. And there's another name for this. It's called volcanic glass. But why was this important? The reason it was important was the Patwin would collect it, they'd shatter it, and they'd make it into cutting pieces. And they would use those cutting pieces to make things like an arrowhead, just like that. Spearheads, knives, axes. Now, if you've been to Rush Ranch, you know that there is no extinct volcano around. We think that the closest extinct volcano that the Patwin utilized was over in Napa County, off Silverado Trail, a place called Glass Mountain. And that presented a couple of problems. Problem number one, it was probably 15 miles away one way. And at that time, there were no Uber, no Lyft, no buses or trains or anything like that. The horse had not been introduced by the Spaniards, so they had to walk. That was problem number one. Problem number two was, it was not on their land. It was on the land of a tribe called the Wapo. And what they had to do was the two chiefs had to get together so that the Patwin could get permission to come on the Wapo land. Because if they didn't have the permission, it would get the Wapo very angry and they may shoot an arrow at them or something along those lines. So what would happen is that the Wapo and the Patwin chiefs would get together and the Patwin would say, we'd like to get some of this obsidian. What would you like in return? And the Wapo chief would say, you know, we heard about these tules and we don't have any around here, so we would like to use these, come over on your land, and we would like to get these so we could build some huts. So that was the trade, obsidian for tules. What happened next was, with permission, the Patwin would go on the Wapo land and they would walk over there with their burden baskets or carry baskets, and they would load them full of this volcanic glass, obsidian, and then come back. That took probably a couple of days because it was round trip, maybe 30 miles. And you're carrying loads. So what would happen is the Wapo would come on the Patwin land with permission and they would harvest the tules. And then they would take the tules back to their land, use it to build huts, baskets, and what have you. Now, there was one other thing that the Patwin did not have that they needed to trade for. That was acorns. So where do acorns come from? Time's up. Oak trees. Where the Patwin lived, on the marsh here, there were no oak trees. So they had to go to where the oak trees were located. And this was very, very important to them, especially in the fall and the winter, because they used that for food. We think, again, that they probably went to the area of the Wapo land, and once again, a trade discussion would occur, because they needed permission to go on the land. They also needed to come up with a trade. So the chiefs would get together and the Patwin chief would say, look, we'd like to come on your land and get some acorns. The Wapo chief would say, you know, we heard about these mussels that you have. And we'd like to come on your land and get some of these mussels because we heard the food is pretty good. And we can use the shells too. So that was the trade. The trade was acorns for mussels. And the same thing occurred as with the obsidian. They'd come on the other land and do that. Now, I told you a little bit ago that there was another use for the mussel shells. And that was they were used as money and they were also used as jewelry. Well, that caused a bit of a predicament because they said if we're going to use it as money, how are we going to carry it around? Because at that time, the Patwin women didn't have purses. The men didn't have wallets. So you know what they came up with is what we're going to do is we're going to drill a hole in the shells and we're going to get some either woven tule or woven grass or maybe a rawhide or sinew from one of the animals that we killed. And we're going to drill a hole and put that on that sinew or woven grass. So what they did was they got a stick and they put a piece of obsidian on the end because it's a cutting instrument. We went to Ace Hardware and this is steel, so we kind of cheated. So what they did then was that they put this in the shell. Can you put it down? And then what they did was they drilled a hole. Now that took a long time, especially if you're going to try to make some kind of jewelry like this. So what happened was the Spaniards came along, and we think that they introduced this. And what this is called a pump drill. And it's relatively simple because it's a stick here, counterbalance, obsidian here. This would have been rawhide, sinew, woven grass. And what happens is you wind it up and you pump it, just like that. That makes it a lot easier to drill those holes in the shell, doesn't it? And we think that the Spaniards got this idea from the Polynesians. That's the people that lived in the Hawaiian Islands and islands in the Pacific. And the reason I can show that is that I was in a museum in Hawaii, and here's a picture of a Polynesian. You see what he's holding? Holding a pump drill. And that's an old, old picture. So, now, the way it was used as money was that, let's say that you had a neat fish hook that I wanted. And I'd say, how much do you want for that fish hook? And you'd say, you know, I'd like 4 shells. So if I was wearing this, I'd take this off, untie it, count out 4 shells, give you the 4 shells, you give me the fish hook. That's the way they used it as money. Now, the way they use it as jewelry. If you're going out to the dance Friday night, and I want to dress up, I put this on and look, I'm ready to go. So that's the way they use it as jewelry. Now, the Patwin, they were self-sufficient. And as I mentioned, they lived off the land and they enjoyed it. And you can experience some of this by coming out and visiting this. For example, if you're able to involve yourself in the educational program, the drilling that I showed, you would be drilling as well. And you would be drilling a hole in a shell. And we would give you that shell and a piece of twine, and you would take that home as your Patwin jewelry or your Patwin money. So the story ends here, but it doesn't have to end for you, because I'm inviting you to come out here to Rush Ranch, experience the Rush Ranch experience. Look at the grinding rock, walk the 3 trails we have here, see the horses. And on the 3rd Saturday of the month, if you come out here and we're open, you might be able to even ride on a wagon. And you know what? The best thing is, it's free. Thank you. Have a great day.